Welcome to the post-lunch session. A gentle reminder to those active on social media, follow us on the Hindu Lit for Life page on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you're posting about the festival, please use hashtag LFL2019. There will be a book signing session after each session, so you can meet the authors at the book signing lounge right outside the pavilion. Hindu Lit for Life is making efforts to be a zero-waste festival. We are working to reduce the use of plastic bottles. Water will be available in bubble top placed at strategic locations, so please fill your bottles from the bubble tops. Now on to the next session, illustrating children's books. Anushka Ravishankar, Lisa Brown, and Shobha Viswanath in conversation with Sandhya Rao. Anushka has written over 30 books for children, including picture books, in verse, retellings of folk tales, and non-fiction. Shobha is the publishing director of Karadi Tales Company. She has authored over 25 books for children. New York Times best-selling illustrator, author, and cartoonist Lisa Brown lives in San Francisco and teaches in the illustration department of the California College of the Arts. Sandhya Rao has been with the media since 1979. She has written and published over 25 books for children in English, Hindi, and in translation. Welcome to the session.
Welcome, everybody. I hope you've all had a good lunch, but not too good a lunch that makes you fall asleep. We're very happy to be here, and since Chitra has already made the initial introductions, I won't go over that again, except to say that we have a very interesting panel here that kind of represents different aspects of children's literature. Anushka does many things, but she's primarily a writer. Lisa also does many things. She's primarily an illustrator. Shobha does many things. She's primarily a publisher, and she and her husband together launched audiobooks in India, which is huge. So we'll start off the session, illustrating children's books, with a brief presentation by each of them, because when you talk about illustrations, you talk about visuals, right? And one of the things you register as a baby is initially some hazy stuff, which then converges into images, pictures, people, three-dimensional. So the visual is very, very important in all our lives. Lisa, by consensus, Lisa will start off the presentation. Lisa?
Can you hear me? I hope so. So I'm just going to have a little presentation to introduce you to my work. There's me at my desk. You can see a lot of paper on the ground where I've become frustrated. Oh, let's see if this... Oh, maybe I'm touching the wrong thing. There we go. Here are some of my picture books. Some of them I've written myself, and some of them I've worked on with other people, with other authors. My latest one was called The Airport Book. It's about the airport. And it has all the excitement of taking a flight for the first time and being in the air and coming off. Emily's Blue Period, I illustrated for an author named Kathleen Daly, and it's about a little girl who's going through a blue period like Picasso because her parents are getting divorced. So she's an artist. Mummy Cat by Marcus Ewert is about a mummified cat in ancient Egypt. And this is Picture the Dead, which is a young adult book that I co-authored and I illustrated, and it's by Adele Griffin and me, and it's an American Civil War ghost story. These are some books that I've done for adults. Well, they're for babies, but they're really for adults. They're humor books about teaching infants different skills. Mix me a drink is very important. This is Fix My Car. And I also do a series of cartoons that used to be in our local newspaper. And what I do is I take classic novels and condense them into 3 panels. So I took 3 classic plays by Shakespeare. You may have heard of him. So I did the Shakespeare's tragedies. I did Oedipus the King. I did On the Road and Little Women. So I do a lot of cartoons. This was a cartoon I did for an anthology called Funny Girl. And this is 7 things I thought, and I still think, are funny, but were really kind of sad, and that all happened to my little brother. And right now, I've just finished working on a graphic novel, my first full-length graphic novel. And it's about conjoined twins in the early 20th century in a circus sideshow. And I also do work with a man known as Lemony Snicket. There's a picture of me and Lemony Snicket. These are some of the books we've done together. This is our latest book that we've done together called Goldfish Ghost, about a dead goldfish. Yeah, he's upside down because that's when he's floating on the top of the water. These are some other incidental pieces of art I've done. Mostly I scribble in notebooks on the beach, and I try to draw what I see. And sometimes what I don't see. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. That was a lovely introduction to who Lisa is. Now we'll have Anushka.
Yeah. Okay, I'm so envious. Those absolutely gorgeous books. So so what I've done basically is that I write picture books, but I don't draw at all. I don't even do stick figures very well. So I have worked with illustrators in different ways. But the presentation I've done is basically about the different ways in which each of my picture books has happened, because every single one of them has happened in a very different way from the others. So I'll just quickly go through. It might be a bit long. I have been warned that I will be stopped halfway if I'm going on for too long. But I'll try
So
to
don't
keep it
be
short.
angry with me if I stop you.
No, I won't. Absolutely not. I'll be quick. What do I have to press? Lisa, you're the one who's just done. This one? Oops. Okay. So, this is just me having fun with the presentation. Sorry. So this is, so basically, the conventional thing is that the text comes first and then the visuals. But I've worked in all kinds of ways, the text first, the visual first, back and forth, all kinds of things. So this was my very first book. And this, actually, the illustrations came complete, like the illustrations were complete and they told the whole story. So there was very little for the text to do. So we wondered what to do, and eventually I wrote it in kind of absurd verse so that it wouldn't repeat what the illustrations were doing. I just have one spread. So I don't have the text here, but for instance, this spread said, get him, net him, tie him tight. Will he bite? He might. That's what the text said. So the text is kind of tangential then to the illustrations. This one again, the illustrations came first, but very differently, because they were just pictures of a market that Emanuele had done, and they were really gorgeous pictures. So initially the plan was just to have a girl go through the market looking at different things, like she saw a bangle seller and she saw this and she saw that, and just getting, again, it was just repeating what the pictures were already telling you. So then I kind of had to create a narrative in the text using, so for that I did this. So I'll just take you through a couple of pages. Jangle, 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 I'm a bangle holding stand. Nosy, 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 I'm a posy, I smell grand. So the pictures came first, and it goes on like that. But we then had to add a few spreads, which Emmanuel had to do later to give the frame text for the whole thing. So there again, there was a bit of back and forth that happened. This one, I wrote the text entirely and gave it to this wonderful South African illustrator called Piet Grobler. And what I love about this is that he has just taken the text and run with it and done his own thing. So when I wrote the text, the sister who's lecturing the little girl was not sitting on a toilet, but that's something that Piet decided to do. And he's also created these really fun a little story of his own in every page with the bird and with the cat. If you can see the tail of the cat is running away from the crocodile. And there the cat wants the milk, clearly in that one, here. So he's kind of then taken the text and created his own little story with the illustrations. And I love it when that happens because it takes the book far beyond where the text takes it, you know. And I always tell the illustrators, go ahead and do what you like, and I can always change the text. It's easier to change the text later. Yeah. So this one worked very differently again. I worked with Pulak Bishwas, who is one of India's first and most well-known children's book illustrators. And what I did was I wrote the whole story in prose, and then Pulak created these really amazing characters, and I then threw away the text entirely, kept the pictures in front of me, and wrote it again in verse, making sure that I didn't repeat what the illustrations were showing. So that's Bhayanak Singh. It doesn't always move, huh? Yeah, and this one again, I worked with Christiana, where the text actually said very little. So the illustrator had to think up the whole, pretty much imagine a whole scenario and almost make up a story. But of course, I gave her suggestions, but also told her she didn't have to stick to them. So it's about different ways to cure a hiccup. And so the only text she had was drink a pail of water standing on a brick. I don't know why this, yeah. So, and then the scene was created by the illustrator. I gave a few suggestions, but of course her imagination went way beyond what I could have suggested. And then the next one, it didn't work, so she goes hick, and there's complete chaos. So it was really nice to work like that because I gave very, very little text, and then the illustrator had to go ahead and make up whole scenarios. Am I running out of time? So elephants never forget, I'll skip because it's almost, I mean, it's the same point I was trying to make, that, you know, there's the text said something and the illustrator had to do other stuff. But, sorry, this thing is very temperamental. Yeah. So this book I don't have any pages for, but this was a really strange, this book came about in a really strange way. So if you see that character there, the characters were created by Trotsky Marudu. So we had these characters that, you know, he'd done a few, he'd not done a lot of them. So we said we must use these characters in some way. So when I started working on it, the designer, Ratna Ramanathan, said that let's do them as postcards. So when I started writing the text and I was imagining postcards, I started writing them as postcards sent from different parts of the world. So there was one from the Taj Mahal, there was one from the London Bridge, there was one from the Eiffel Tower, and so on. The pyramids. And so then we decided, so the characters came first, then the idea of the postcards, then the text, and then Ratna went back and got these, you know, these poster painters who do things like these charts, kind of hyper-reality kind of painting. And then they did the illustration. So that again went back and forth in so many ways that it's difficult to know who actually came up with the idea. So yeah, so picture books can happen in many ways. That's the point I wanted to make. Thanks.
Thank you, Anushka. Shobha, can we have yours?
Okay, we started Karadi Tales Company as an audiobook publishing house. And we started them as a combination of books and cassettes. I don't know how many of you here in the audience still have a cassette player. We don't have one. Even for memory's sake, we haven't kept one, which is a shame. And then we moved from cassettes to CDs, and my laptop is also now without a CD player. And while we were struggling with the format of how to present the audio to our readers, we just couldn't sit idle, and therefore we ventured into the world of picture books. The first thing I did was take some of the audiobooks and pare down the text and converted them into just picture books because the illustrations were lovely. But then we also started creating original stories. The earlier set of the stories from the publishing house were all retellings. They were from the Panchatantra or the Jataka or the mythology tales. And then I had an invitation to go to the Frankfurt Book Fair. It was my first time, and it was my first time that I saw this whole world of really, really beautiful picture books, and I was thinking, what in the world am I doing sitting here in this corner in Chennai and creating these books? And it's always an aspiration, and that sometime or the other, that in the bookshelves in other publishers' booths, one of our books would also sit alongside. And maybe subconsciously, this was something I was striving or working towards. And I am just going to run you through some of the picture books that have emerged since then. Farmer Falgu Goes on a Trip is a series of 4 books. And this is the first book where we had a writer called Chitra Saundar, who's based in the UK, who came up with the idea. And the illustrator, Kanika Nair, has such a unique and unusual style that the book just leapt to life. And sure enough, over the years since Farmer Falgu and the subsequent books have been published, we've sold rights to the book to France and Germany and Japan. And I forget, there's another country there. And so I'm just showing you one spread from each of the books that, from our catalog, and not the entire catalog, just some of the books that I personally like. So this is Farmer Falgu, who goes in search of silence because his farm is really noisy. This is a book we sort of half created in-house. It was a fish that has this deep burning desire to fly, and we wanted to use some of the Indian folk art, but modify it slightly and not keep to the traditional way that folk art is presented. And this is Spot the Fish, which is finally flying. This is a book which is done by this illustrator whom we accidentally discovered, who had done an internship at the IDC in IIT, and all his illustrations are dark and brooding, but they were so fantastic that we did want to make a book out of it, and so we did The Night Monster. And here's a book. It's about a child who's afraid of the night. Natasha Sharma is really a lovely writer, and Priya Kurian is just absolutely fabulous. This book won the Best Illustration Award at the Good Books Fest a couple of years back, and it's about this really stubborn, spoilt little princess who insists on carrying everything home. So what Priya does with the text is completely her own. I mean, she has her own narrative that runs side by side along with the text, which is fantastic. And then this is a book which is we wanted to create as a wordless book because everybody knows the story of the fox and the crow. And we found this fantastic illustrator called Kalpio. But when we put the illustrations together, it still required a little bit of text. And this book was featured as one of the best children's books in 2015 in the New York Public Library's list. So the line in this spread goes, "Their eyes met, a challenge was spoken." So it's the fox and the crow. Yeah. And we found 2 Korean illustrators at one of the book fairs whom we completely fell in love with their art. And this is a fictional story about a tiger that loses its stripes because each of its members in its clan die, so each time another tiger dies, it loses a stripe, and so it's called Dodgy Stripes. So this is realistic watercolor. And Lion's Feast is by one of our favorite illustrators, Chetan Sharma, who's an animator. So all the picture books that he creates for us just leap out of the page like dance in their own, with their own music and step. And this is a story about Muthu Mama and Muthu Mami. Blue Jackal was one of our first books, like I said, the one which was an audiobook, and I turned it into a picture book. And we've sold rights to this also to several countries, just based on the folk art. We took the text and pared it down, or actually removed it completely and put a verse in. And so that's the gamut, or the kinds of illustrators and illustrations we work with. We are always happy to try new people, new art, new illustration. We've done books with photographs, we've done books with collage art. We like mixed media. The one that we like to veer away from, which we don't like personally as illustrations, is digital art. But, well, that's another topic we'll talk about. Thank you, Sandhya.
Thank you, Shobha. I'm sure all of you were fascinated by not just the illustrations, but the stories that came along with the illustrations from each of our panelists. So, for a short discussion on illustrating for children, the first question that I would like to throw out to all of you is, you know, many years ago when I went to a school to do a reading, the principal of the school invited me in, and I was going to read from some picture books. And he said, well, actually, I don't think we need picture books. Why do children need picture books? Pictures. They have imaginations. So I'd like to know from each of you how you react to this. I was stunned, but I went ahead nevertheless. Over to you.
I'll start as an illustrator. Of course, I think everything needs pictures because I'm an illustrator. But I think that a picture book is a unique item. It's the marriage of text and image. And I think especially in this world where everything is multimedia, you're reading pictures like you're reading words. And you can actually get a lot more sophisticated in a picture book than you can in a book with just words for children, because the pictures carry some of the weight and the text carries some of the weight, and you have this dialogue between the word and image. It's actually, you're allowing a child to decode two different things at the same time. So you can use more sophisticated language because you have the images sort of buoying you up. So I think that it's actually crucial to have picture books. And I think they take away picture books at too young an age.
Just to add another dimension to this, I've had some children tell me, and their parents tell me as well, that their children, some of them, don't like to read paperbacks that have pictures in them. So just to take this discussion a little further, Anushka, what is your response?
Like books that have pictures in them.
They don't like paperbacks
Oh, really?
that have pictures in them. I'd like to know what your take is on that.
Sure.
As a writer.
Yeah, so there are so many things I know. See, basically, I agree completely with what Lisa said, that, you know, but I've come across this a lot. I think India especially, we seem to, it's changing, but we seem to think that words are more important than pictures. I don't know where that comes from, and that's another discussion. But I remember when I showed Tiger on a Tree to a friend who was looking for a book for her son, who was about 6 then. She looked at it and said, there are so few words. He'll finish this really quickly. But you know, that is not how children relate to picture books at all. They look at the pictures, like she said, they read the pictures. They see much more of it than we realize. And they go back over and over again. And that's the value of the picture book, because and every time they read it or read the text or the pictures, they see something new that we haven't noticed. And I realized this was happening when my daughter, when she was all grown up, she was like in college, and we were cleaning up and found a book that she read as a kid. And it was actually a paperback with a few black and white illustrations. And I remember she looked at those illustrations and she said, oh, I used to look at these illustrations such a lot when I was a kid. And I realized as a grown-up, you don't look so much at the pictures because you've been conditioned to kind of pass by the pictures and look at the text instead. But as a child, that relationship is with the pictures very intimate, and I think grown-ups don't realize that. And coming back to the paperback thing, it's actually, I was just at the book fair, and I found a lot of children who one would have thought would be past the stage of wanting books with pictures are still looking for books with pictures. And I also think that things are changing. People, even grown-ups now, everyone's reading graphic novels, so pictures are coming back, becoming more important. So hopefully the principal has changed his mind by now.
Yeah, actually, taking off from what Anushka said, it's unfortunate that it is the parent who's making the decision to buy the book, you see. Because I doubt if such a remark would be coming from a child that I don't want a book with pictures, especially a young reader. And because we as grown-ups, I never grew up with picture books. I mean, the picture book genre itself is a very new, to India, it's very new. So we usually end up giving our children the things that we have read or we have enjoyed. And therefore, but as Anushka says, the picture's making its way back with the graphic novel and with so much of visual inputs in several forms, whether even if a child's sitting with a tablet or a mobile phone, I mean, or the games that they play, it's all a visual thing, you know. So.
Well, actually, just to clarify, Shobha, it was the parent of a child who said, my son refuses to read paperbacks which have pictures in them, kind of thing. Yeah. But, you know, these, I mean, it's so subjective. Books, reading, you know, it's such a subjective thing. What you like, what you don't like, again, is so subjective. But talking about picture books, all of you have made this point that picture books are so important. And in fact, I think a lot of people adults discover picture books when they have children themselves and they start, you know, apart from teachers and educators, I think a lot of adults rediscover, and then they realize that, well, picture books are for everybody, not just for small children. But anyway, going on to another aspect of illustrating for children, there's a lot of discussion, especially, you know, over the last few years about, you know, around the issue of political correctness and, you know, consequently around the issue of what's appropriate and what's not. There's a lot of it that goes into texts when we develop texts for children, for picture books and other books. Does that are illustrators also constrained by issues like that? Do illustrations necessarily have to be constrained? What would your thoughts be on that? Yes, Anushka.
See, there'll always be gatekeepers, and I think in India we've come across that many times, that, you know, a book that we thought was completely innocuous, somebody will find something that they don't, some principal or some teacher in some school will find something that they don't like about it. This is not to do with illustrations, but we've done a book, we published a book called Fizz Fuzz Boom, which is basically 3 stories about farts, so by 3 different people. So we once went to a school to do the book, and of course the discussion with children was about farts, and, you know, we asked them to share experiences of when they or someone in their family farted at a very odd time and how. And so the children were having a blast and we were having a blast, and then suddenly we start getting messages on our phones saying the principal is getting upset, the librarian's getting upset, you know. So there will always be gatekeepers. Whether illustrators should restrict themselves, again, you know, it's, I showed you that book just now, which one was that? Today is My Day, in which there was this girl sitting on a toilet. Now, I would never have imagined that, and I was delighted to see it when Pierre did that. But I'm sure there'll be people who don't like it and who will therefore reject the book because they'll think there's a picture which is not okay for their children to see. Come on, they all sit on toilets. So, I mean, it's very, of course, as writers and publishers, we don't agree with that, but we constantly having to deal with it. I don't know what we can do about that.
I think every child is a person and people are different, and some children can handle a subject that is very sophisticated and some children are not ready. And I think that you can have a book about anything as long as you're presenting it in a way that a child can understand. So you don't want to bring them something that is really done in the language of an adult, whether it's a visual language or a textual language. So you can talk about death, and I think it's very important for a child to learn about death. They're thinking about it anyway. There's probably someone in their lives who have died or who will die, and they want to connect to that in some way and find solace in a book. It doesn't have to be direct, it can be metaphorical, it could be allegorical, but I think it's very important to address these serious subjects. I teach picture books. I bring in picture books to the classroom for my college students, and they're about poverty, they're about racism, they're about war. And I think that, and I've brought them, when I go visit schools, there are kids who have been through poverty, racism, war. And to have a book that is addressing these really difficult subjects in a way they can understand is very important.
No, for me, I find I've encountered this less with illustrations and more with text. So if we have a book called Monkeys on a Fast, in which if I say Chakrapani, the monkey chieftain, was a fat monkey, there's a problem that teachers have with the word fat, because it's not something that you're allowed to say to each other or point at each other and say that. But it's just a word, and I don't think that, like Anushka said, there are always going to be gatekeepers, but we as publishers decide which to allow and which to retain. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, children's books are often given stepmotherly treatment, as we were discussing just before we came here, in different ways, whether it's the stories themselves, or whether it's the price of the book, or, you know, whether it's the theme, the characters, the words you use, the vocabulary, political correctness or not, whatever. So I thought it would be interesting for everyone to hear from you a little bit about the process of creating, you know, how writers, publishers, and illustrators come together to create illustrated books for children. So who'd like to go first?
What we do when we receive a manuscript that we really like is usually my editorial team and I are pretty much on the same page, and if we like the book and it's a funny book, then we look at the basket of illustrators that we have who can do funny illustrations or who can do the story justice. And then once we find the illustrator, sometimes if it's an illustrator that whom we've not worked with before, then we have to pretty much handhold the illustrator through the process. We rarely ever let the illustrator work with the writer because neither of them know the craft really well, the other's craft, or the craft of putting together a book is not something either the writer knows or the illustrator. Each one's strength lies in their own particular fields. But I think what finally brings the book together to completion is the writer and the illustrator and the design person, you know, who marries these two together to make the book, who chooses the correct typeface, and we who decide what format the book should be in, what size the book should be in. Because all of those is what goes into making a picture book that can sit on a shelf and attract the customer or the reader. And this is not a small process. It's taken us 2 years sometimes to complete a picture book, because while the text comes in really early and the edit is over, illustrators work at their own whims and fancies, and I'm so sorry. Yeah, but they do. I mean, if we've got 18 books in the pipeline, and they're all at different stages of readiness, because they're all dependent on the final files from the illustrator.
But don't you think illustrations take that much more time to do?
They do, but the thing is that once we agree with the illustrator on the time frame that they need, then I think it's good to honor the time frame. You see, it very rarely happens that anybody gives us the illustrations on time. In fact, hardly. It's never happened.
Lisa?
It's never happened.
Try me.
Anushka.
Can I just speak up in defense of illustrators? Two things. One is that I recently have started doing stick figures for a book that we're doing. And even to draw stick figures needs so much time and patience that I have a sudden, I have discovered a great respect for the time of illustrators. It's not easy, because you're also looking for perfection in a line, and it's not like writing where you can just delete and then go. You have to start over again. So as a stick figure illustrator, I completely understand. The other thing is, I was once listening to an illustrator speak about how he works, and sometimes they're perfectionists, and there are times when he was saying that he's done the whole book, and his each page is a painting, and he's done the whole book and then decided it doesn't work and gone back to the beginning. So I guess you've got to give them that.
To some extent, but
I agree with you both. Illustrators can take a really long time, and sometimes it's because it's hard, and it's actually, the process takes time. It's a physical thing, but sometimes it is laziness. But I like to say that I try to impress upon my students that it is a team effort. You have this wonderful idea as a writer, or as an illustrator, or as someone who does both, but you're giving it over to this wonderful team. You have your editor, you have your designer, you have even marketing, who's going to bring it to the world and make sure that people will buy it. And I love that collaborative aspect of it. Often I'm one of the illustrators in editors' baskets, and they call me and they say, we have a manuscript and we think it's perfect for you. And then I am illustrating it without any contact with the author, but I have my editor between us, sort of orchestrating the whole thing, which is wonderful. Every so often, which is very rare for anyone, I will come up with an idea with an author together, and then we will sell it to an editor. And when I did that for my book called Mummy Cat with my friend Marcus, once we sold it, we asked the editor to not let us speak to each other anymore about the book. We said, now you are going to stand between us, and we don't want to know what each other is thinking, because you get so precious with your art, and you don't want to think that anyone is dictating how they want it to be. So my editor was able to sort of separate us for a little while so that we can go off and work on our own and then come back together to this wonderful team.
Yes, yeah.
So what you said is absolutely right about being, treated stepmotherly and as if you're like little children almost. Because I remember once I went to this penguin gathering for all authors, and somebody asked me, there was an old gentleman, very sweet person sitting next to me, and he asked me, so what do you write? Because they were all authors there. So I said, I write children's books. And he said, never mind, that is also very creative. It was very kind of him, but it was kind of... So that is generally the attitude one's always faced with. But that's okay. Everyone's got used to it now. But and people do tend to think that just because you're writing for children, it's something that's easy to do and everybody can do it. I've been asked that, oh yeah, I've been told that, oh yeah, a lot of housewives these days are writing children's books. Really? So we constantly faced with that sort of thing. But it's not an easy thing. It is a craft like any kind of writing is, and illustration is it's like a painter's job. It's as difficult as that. So it's really upsetting when people think that anyone can do it, that just because it's for children, anyone can do it. Anyone who's got a child can write a book for their child, which as publishers, we are constantly getting manuscripts saying that I wrote this and my daughter loves it, or my grandson loves it, or my niece loves it. We say, then tell it to your niece or your grandson. Don't send it to us, because it's not that simple. It's a craft. You have to work at it. You have to hone it. And it's not easy to write a children's book. It's as easy or difficult as writing any book.
That sort of goes into, in the United States, into book reviews and the book industry, we're not taken seriously. And whereas with an adult book, they will have a novel and they'll have another comparable novelist review it in a paper. And for a picture book, they'll have someone who has a niece or a nephew. And they don't understand the craft at all. And that feels really sad, and I hope that will change. I write book reviews for the New York Times Magazine every so often, and it's such a treat to be able to treat our genre of literature with respect.
Yes, illustrating for illustrating picture books. I mean, as Anushka pointed out, these pictures are not just illustrations, they are actually paintings. And in fact, one of the pictures up on my wall that I'm most proud of is an original from a picture book done by Ashok Rajgopalan. We have a lot to talk about. There's lots of things we could talk about, but we're out of time, so we'd like to take questions from the floor, please. Any questions? Yes?
Now, though people say that adults don't look at picture books, I think they do all the time. What about film magazines? What about women's magazines? It's full of pictures. And when I did my book for adults, for young adults, on social science history books actually, and I did a lot of field work with women to find out what kind of a book they wanted. I can tell you every single woman I talked to said they wanted a book with pictures. So there's lots of art in that book.
So what are the main elements of a children's book? Like, if I want to write a children's book, what are the main elements I should put into it?
Okay, can we just, since you're interested in writing, Anushka, could you talk to her at the end of the session? Because we are focusing on illustrations right now, if you don't mind. Anushka will give you a one-on-one, okay? Because she's one of the foremost writers for children in India today, all right?
My question is to Miss Anushka, ma'am. Ma'am told about that the psychology of the children's. Once I go to one work from the publisher, I am a budding writer, but that time I submitted one poems, then who told that this is not in the level of the child. It's very tough to get some kind of understand the mentality of the children is very tough.
Right. Yeah, can I intervene again? Again, this is a question pertaining to writing. So, since we are talking about illustrate, yes, is that a question to do with illustration? Oh, fantastic, super. You can talk to Anushka at the end, okay?
I have a question for Lisa Brown. So a lot of writers have trouble letting go of their writing even though it's complete. They keep going back to it, editing it over and over, and sometimes have to force themselves to send it off to the editor and say, final draft, and I promise you this is it. Do illustrators go through the same thing? Do you ever feel like you can't let go of a spread or an illustration?
That is a really good question. I think it depends on the illustrator. I know a lot of illustrators come from two different worlds. They come from a background of editorial illustration, so they're illustrating for magazines, and so they are illustrating for an editor. and it's a job. They have to produce something that the editor wants to see. So they're used to sort of changing and according to what their art director wants, and they're very responsive because it's a job. And then there are similar animators who also have that job aspect. Fine artists are a little different. They're a little more precious about their art. But as I said before, it is a team effort, so you really need to respect the opinions of your entire team. But sometimes it is hard because writers and illustrators, we're artists, and we feel precious about our work. It's a balance.
Hello. Good afternoon. I have a question for Shobha ma'am. Ma'am, why do you feel like you would prefer to veer away from digital artists for illustrating children's books?
This is a personal choice, actually. This is my choice because I find that most digital art, all the portfolios at least that I've seen that have come to me, they all look the same, and they are so, they lack warmth, and they are flat in their colors.
Oh, I was asking because I'm a student and a digital artist, and I was considering a career in illustrating children's books.
Well, there are takers for it. I personally don't subscribe to it. Yeah.
No problem. Thank you, ma'am.
Hello.
But there must be some ways of making, even digital art warm, and would you have any suggestions for her?
There are some digital artists who work really, really hard and bring that traditional hand-painted look to it. Digital art, otherwise, the kind that's accepted by publishers are usually stylized art, where you take the digital art and you stylize it. You don't just color it digitally. I mean, the whole art itself is very avant-garde, very stylized. And that's something also one could look at, yeah.
Hello. Good afternoon. I would like to know what is a rough estimate of time that it takes for you to bring out an illustration from concept to, to ground. I know it's quite relative, but something which we can get an insight on the process, perhaps.
It varies between people, of course. There are some people who work very fast. They're much in demand. There are some people who work very slower than a publisher would like. They're less in demand. It usually takes me about 6 months from start to finish if I'm not writing the text. People think that writing, because it's so short, will take no time at all, but actually writing is about half of it. So when I'm doing a book myself, I think about it for several months, and I'm changing each word around, making sure that every word is the right word, because there's so few. But then I start drawing, and it takes about 6 months, and then it takes about another year to see it on the shelf. So you have to wait a long time. It's very frustrating sometimes.
Hi. Nowadays, still they have a discrimination from celebrating an artist and an illustrator. Are we in a period, we've started celebrating an illustrator as equal to a serious artist? How's the world right now?
I don't know about the world. I will place an illustrator above an artist. Because I know it's not just at the creative imagination of the artist who just paints something on a canvas, while an illustrator has to look at the text and bring that to life through her illustrations or through his illustrations. So for me, in the rung of these art people who draw and paint, the illustrator is right at the top. Yeah.
Oh, I was told not to do that. I think that illustrators are definitely fine artists. Not everyone believes that. I'm hoping it changes. I think that it is so exciting to be an illustrator, especially for children, because it is a piece of fine art that is mass-produced, that children will be able to interact with in a way that they might not ever interact with another piece of fine art in their lives. There are some people who will never get to a museum, which can be very cold and forbidding, but a book, it's theirs. And they're really interacting with that piece of art. And it is a fine piece of art.
So while I agree with both of them, I have spoken to a lot of illustrators, that we work with, and I know that they feel this too, that, their work is valued less than that of fine artists. Hopefully that will change, but at the moment it's true that they are valued less than fine artists, and it's not right. I agree that it's not right.
That we can see, yes. So I think we have to end this session. We've had a lovely session. We all have pictures and words in our heads. And here we have had 3 wonderful panelists to bring that to life. And here's to beautiful picture books from all of them and from all of you, for all of you and your children and your grandparents. All the best.
Thank you, Sandhya.